G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kaitlyn and I'm an American learning to live down under here in beautiful Sydney, Australia. As an American who moved to Australia, there were so many slang words that I had to learn when I came over here. Some, luckily, I already knew thanks to my Aussie partner, but there were still so many words that I needed to know and learn when I got over here. So today, to help out my fellow Americans who are just a little bit lost on Aussie slang, I put together a list of the 50 must-know words when you come over here to Australia. Some of these, I wish I knew what they meant before I came over here. Some of these might actually be a little bit common and ones you already know, but trust me, these 50 words are words that you are definitely going to want to know before or right when you come over to Australia, even if you're just here on holiday. So welcome to the channel, grab a Brekkie, grab a cuppa, and let's jump right into the video. The first word is mate. This one's pretty common and I think most Americans know this. It is a generally friendly term if people use the word mate, but once in a while you'll hear it flipped and it kind of depends on the overall tone. If somebody's talking about somebody's mate, it might not always be a friendly manner. They might be talking about somebody that the person genuinely dislikes. So you're going to have to pick this one up in conversation to see, are they talking about somebody who's friendly, who they're friends with and is a mate, or is it used a little bit more sarcastically and refers to somebody that the person just doesn't really like. The second word you're going to need to know is servo, which is short for service station. These are the small little service stations that you'll see throughout petrol stations, aka gas stations over here in Australia. And in a way, it's kind of like the typical 7-Eleven back in the States. You have your junk food, you have quick grab and go meals, you have coffee. Some of the things that surprised me though was that the coffee at the servos here is so much better than the servo coffee over in the States. It's even better than a lot of the coffee chain places. So if you're in a pinch and you want coffee, don't worry about going into a servo. It's still going to have a pretty decent coffee. Along with that, for my 18 and older viewers over here in Australia is bottle-o. So bottle-o is what we typically call a liquor store or a wine and spirits store over in the States. Over here they sell beer, wine, and spirits all in one place. But if you hear Aussies talking about needing to stop at the bottle-o to pick up a bottle of something, they're talking about going to pick up alcohol. Fourth word is Arvo. So Arvo is not to be confused with the fifth word, which is Avo. So Arvo is just short for afternoon. If somebody has an appointment at 2 o'clock, they might say they have an appointment in the Arvo. If you hear Avo, Avo is short for avocado. So two completely different meanings. Some people have smashed Avo on toast in the morning, and then in the Arvo they'll go grab some coffee. So you definitely don't want to mix these two words up. A lot of Aussies might give you a little bit of a confused look depending on how you're pronouncing it. I know I pronounced Arvo and Avo a little bit weird, but that again, I still have an American accent. The sixth word you will hear a lot over here is Maccas. Maccas is short for McDonald's. Typically over in the States, people just call it McDonald's. I think they tried to make Mickey D's popular back in like the early to mid 2000s and it just didn't stick. Over here at McDonald's is typically called Maccas. It's even in some of their advertising. Here you will see signs for Maccas everywhere and they do have a couple different menu items. I might actually do a little like Maccas different item taste test video. If you're interested in that, drop it in the comments down below. But over here, if you hear people talk about Maccas, they're just referring to McDonald's. Tradie is a word you will hear a lot, typically in conversations with local Aussies. If you're here and just going through like the tourist guide areas, not really communicating too much with local Aussies, you might not even hear this word. But if you're going to be over here for some time, at some point you are going to hear somebody mention the word tradie, and that is just short for a tradesperson. Typically, people who work in the construction area are called tradies. Sometimes it's a more general term for people who basically just work with their hands for a living. The eighth word is Strewth, and this is something that I only hear once in a while from older Aussies, typically at the pub after having a couple drinks and having conversations with them. Once in a while you hear somebody say the word Strewth, which it's basically just a surprised expression. Somebody wasn't really expecting something to happen and they might say Strewth. It's not something that you're going to hear that much. It does seem like one of those Aussie words that is slowly fading away. So you might not hear it too often, but if you do, just know that it's basically just a overall surprised comment. So, Smoko is something that you'll hear if you are working over here in Australia, and that is just a smoke break, a coffee break, just a quick little break in the morning or in the Arvo while you're at work. Because somebody's on a smoko doesn't necessarily mean that they are smoking. This is kind of just a general term for any sort of break throughout the workday. Next on the list is Straya, and this is something that you are going to hear from Aussies who shorten pretty much everything. They even shorten the name of Australia to just Straya. It's kind of a joke that it's a little bit more of a bogan-ish term for Australia, but I know people who seem pretty highbrow and have said Straya as well. So if somebody says Straya, just know they're referring to Australia. They shorten pretty much everything here, including the name of the country. 11 is Croc, and they are not just talking about those really ugly shoes, they are talking about crocodiles, because saltwater crocodiles are very common over here, particularly in the northern area of the country. From the northern area of Western Australia throughout the Northern Territory all the way into Queensland, saltwater crocodiles are very common, so it is pretty common to hear somebody talking about a croc, especially if you're in the Northern Territory or Queensland. 12th word is goon. Goon is a word that you're going to know if you know people who go to the bottle pretty often. Goon is kind of basically boxed wine, but instead of it being in a box, they actually take the bag of wine, which is called a goon bag, and take it out of the box and drink out of the bag. So goon is like really, really cheap wine. Typically what people seem to drink when they're in their teenage years and into their 20s. It's wine that's typically not very good, but it is very affordable. Tassie. Tassie is a shortened word for Tasmania, which is one of the states here in Australia. It is a beautiful little state, but probably a place you'll want to visit when it's warm out, because it does get very, very cold. Tassie is very close to Antarctica. But all throughout Australia, people typically don't say Tasmania, you will hear them say Tassie. Now, if you're at the bar or the bottle out, you will hear people say stubby or tinny, which both mean a can or a small bottle of beer. Tinny means the can, stubby means the bottle, and as a little bonus, instead of being called koozies or beer koozies, they actually call them stubby holders over here in Australia. You might not hear that word too often, but it is pretty common for somebody to have a stubby and also use a stubby holder. Ute is probably one of my favorite words. I think it's cute, it's sweet, it's short for utility vehicle, and it's what we call a pickup truck over in the States. Now this one, if an Aussie calls you this, you messed up, and that is a wanker. So if you're a wanker, you're acting like an ass. Basically just an insult that means you're acting like an idiot. Along with that is this word that YouTube probably won't let me say it without getting demonetized, but it is a very common word over here in Australia, not just as an insult, but it's actually kind of a compliment too. So if you're in an argument with somebody and they use this word, obviously they're using it in a derogatory way, but if somebody starts using words like mad or sick, something like that in front of it, it's actually a compliment, and get used to hearing it because a lot of people in Australia use this word. Even though it's probably one of the biggest insults in the States, this word is pretty common over here in Australia. So if you have sensitive ears, you're going to have to get used to it over here. And 19 is reckon, and this is something that I never really heard much over in the States, but then when I moved over here, a lot of people will say, what do you reckon? Do you reckon? It's really like, what do you think? What do you think that means? What do you mean? So even though it is a word that you might hear once in a while over in the States, you'll hear people say reckon pretty often over here. Bogan is another word that you will hear over here, and if you hear somebody say bogan, think of it as a redneck because it's probably going to be the closest comparison to it. Yes, there are some differences and whatnot, but overall, if somebody talks about somebody being bogan, kind of think of it as they're being a redneck. Footy is short for football, but they are not talking about American football. That is actually called gridiron over here. Footy is short for AFL, which is the Australian Football League, which is a sport that was made up and invented in Australia. It's also the name of the actual ball that's used in footy and rugby. I just found this out over the weekend that even a rugby ball is also called a footy. So Aussies are very big into sports, and chances are at least one person is going to bring up footy while you're over here. So just know that they are not talking about American football. They're not talking about soccer or European football. They are talking about Australian football. Galah over here is a type of bird, but it's also kind of an insult. If somebody calls you a galah, you're acting a little flighty, you're acting kind of like an airhead. So if somebody calls you a galah, it's not really a compliment, they're sort of comparing you to a bird in a way. Now, tucker's a word that you'll hear once in a while over here, and tucker just means food. Like, that's it. Some people talk about how they used to go to the tucker shop at school, which is just like a little food shop where you used to be able to buy food. Typically, you won't hear a lot of Aussies refer to food as tucker generally, but if it does come up in conversation, just know tucker means food. So this one, people had commented multiple times on one of the videos that I did before, and that is Fanny. Fanny is very similar in the way that people in England use it, which basically just means it's a woman's lady bits, which again I think is a word I can't actually say without getting demonetized on YouTube. But if somebody is talking about a fanny, they are not talking about your bum, they are talking about a woman's bits. Woop Woop is a term you will hear when people are talking about going out to the middle of nowhere. Back in the States, I heard some people refer to this as going to bumblefuck. But over here, if somebody's going to Woop Woop, it just means that they are going really, really far away, probably out in the bush somewhere or somewhere that is a very long distance. Root is another word that you're going to want to make sure you don't confuse when you get over here. Root is just a sort of Bogan-ish word to fuck. So, good on ya. Even though it's not a word, it's said so quickly that it does kind of come out as one word, good on ya. Even then, I think it's still a little bit too much of a gap. I don't think I really say it fluently enough to get that one word emphasis in there. But good on you can be a little bit sarcastic. It could be encouraging, kind of like mate. You're going to need to know what sort of context it's being referred to. If you're sitting there and bragging about your job and how wonderful you're doing and somebody says good on you, they're being sarcastic, they don't actually mean it. But if you just happen to come in and casually mention, oh yeah, I got a promotion at work, and somebody says good on you, well, that's actually encouraging. So you're kind of going to have to learn in context what that means. It could be good or bad, but saying good on you is pretty common over here in Australia. Larrikin is one of those words that I just love to say. Even though it does sound like a bird, it's not. Larrikin is somebody who is a joker, a jester, somebody who likes to make jokes and ease the tension a little bit. Barbie, I think we all know what this is thanks to that wonderful old school commercial. Barbie is just short for barbecue over here in Australia. And over here they don't say shrimp, they say prawn. So if people are talking about prawns over here, they're talking about what we call shrimp over in America. But no, they do not put shrimp on the Barbie. Typically people will put prawns on the Barbie, even though that's still not that much of a common thing from what I've seen. Brekkie is just one of those cute short little words that means breakfast, which from what I've heard is actually becoming very, very popular with American kids thanks to the TV show Bluey, where they say Brekkie all the time. So this is even becoming part of American vernacular, especially with younger kids. So Drongo. Drongo is another one of those kind of insulting words where if somebody's calling you a Drongo, you messed up, you're acting foolish, you're acting like an idiot if somebody calls you a Drongo. So Snag is short for sausage over here, so if you are having eggs and snags and toast and whatnot for breakfast, snags are sausage. True blue. True blue is a term that's used for a classic Aussie, an old school Aussie. Not just somebody who's old school, but somebody who is just a generally good person as well. If they're Australian, if they have a good personality, if they're just overall a good person, they are a true blue Aussie. Esky is what we call a cooler over in the States. Esky is actually the name, like the brand name of it. So the way people will say Kleenex instead of tissue, a lot of Aussies over here will say Esky instead of cooler. Even if they have a cooler that isn't from the brand Esky, it's still called an Esky. If you're liking this video so far, hit the like and subscribe button down below. Join our little Amer-Australian family. I post on Mondays and normally Thursdays about the differences between American and Australian culture and the overall process of learning to live down under. Bush is a term that you're going to hear often over here. It refers to pretty much anywhere outside of the city and outside of the near suburbs. So you have the cities, outside of the cities are the suburbs, outside of the suburbs are the bush, and then out back of the bush you have the outback. So you hear people talking about going out into the bush or going bushwalking. It basically just means that they're going out beyond the suburbs, beyond the town, into the actual bush areas in Australia. Flat out is something that you're going to hear, especially if you are working over here in Australia. It's actually shortened from the full saying, which is flat out like a lizard drinking. Flat out just means that you are very, very busy. Lollies, and this one makes me laugh so much. We were actually just at a friend's house over the weekend, and they have 4 little girls. One of them asked for a piece of candy, and the mother turns around to her and says, "We don't have candies in this house, we have lollies." So lollies are just candy, a different name for it. Typically chocolate isn't lollies, chocolate is just chocolate, but lollies are any sort of like sweet, fruity, gummy, minty type candies. Mozzie, and mozzies are like the bane of my existence over the summer. Mozzies are just short for mosquitoes, and if you live in an area where there happens to be a lot of still water like we do, then you are going to get slammed with mozzies over the summer. So, ripper is a compliment over here. Typically you'll hear people say like, "You little ripper," or something like that.
You little ripper! Thanks, lads.
So if somebody says that, it's just a compliment. Sunnies are just short for sunglasses. So sunnies are just short for sunglasses. No matter what time of year it is over here in Australia, you are going to want to make sure you have a pair of sunnies with you. Thongs are not what Americans seem to think, even though they do laugh when they first hear it. Thongs are what we call flip-flops over in the States, whereas what we call thongs over in the States are actually G-string over here in Australia. So sick is one of those words where people aren't just using it if they're actually feeling sick or if they're feeling crook over here in Australia. Sick also means a compliment. If somebody's sick, they are awesome. So sick doesn't just mean actually physically sick. Sick can also be a compliment over here. Sanga, or sanger as it's spelled, is actually just short for a sandwich. So if you go into a Servo, you will see plenty of sangas that you can pick from for lunch. No worries is something that a lot of Aussies say. Now Aussies are very polite and well-mannered overall, but if you say thank you, don't expect to hear you're welcome necessarily. A lot of Aussies typically say no worries from what I've seen in the service industry and the professional industry. People just seem to say no worries instead of you're welcome. Heaps is one of those words that you will hear heaps over here in Australia. Heaps just means a lot. It's one of those words that you don't hear much in the States, but heaps just means a lot of something. Hard yakka is something that I hear once in a while. This is another one of those terms that seems to be fading out a little bit more with the generations, but hard yakka just means hard work. Defo is short for definitely, and this one really confused me when people would randomly say defo at the end of a sentence or would randomly say defo in a conversation because I had no idea what it meant, and defo is just short for definitely. And the last one is crikey, and crikey is not a word that you're going to hear nearly as often in Australia as you think. I can count on one hand the number of times people have actually said crikey in the 6 months that I have moved over here. It's a very old school Aussie word. Crikey is something that you might hear once in a while from an old school Aussie, but typically crikey is not something you're going to hear very often. So don't come over here expecting to say and hear the word crikey all the time. It's just an expression of like surprise or amusement when Aussies do say it, but you're not going to hear it nearly as often as Hollywood says you will. So that's it for this list, you guys. About 50 Australian words that Americans need to know before coming to Australia. If there are any important ones that I missed, let me know in the comments down below. Share it with any Americans who are watching this who have some words that they just need to know before they come over to Australia. I hope you liked it. If you did, hit the like and subscribe button down below to join our little Amer-Australian family. I post on Mondays and normally Thursdays about the differences between American and Australian culture and the overall process of learning to live down under. My name's Kaitlyn, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!